All three parts of the Faith Baptist documentary have been released, and as a result, Summit Church has put out a letter responding. Now, what we're going to be doing in this episode is going through that letter. We're just going to read the whole thing. I'll provide commentary as we go to try and clarify some things. But I'm working with the documentation from Faith Baptist to try and put together a timeline or something that establishes a little bit more of a timeline to complement the documentary in the hopes of answering any questions you may have and answering the questions of others. Because we want clear transparency during this event, because the value of this event is to see when you are faithful to the Lord, He carries you through. And I don't want any sort of question, I don't want anything else distracting from that message. So let's get things clear, let's get it laid out so you can see that, yes, it is the Lord who leads. We need to trust and put our faith in Him. And through that faith in the Lord, that faith that comes from the Lord, that you can endure. You can endure trials and hardship, and it's the Lord who, at the proper time, will lift you up, will raise you up. So, let's get into the letter. Now, if you're new here, welcome to TLDR Christianity. Normally, this is a podcast released every Friday. This is something different. Not that it's that much different, just a different format, but let's get into things. So, as you can see, this is a letter posted on Summit's website, and its title is Directional Elder Letter to the Summit Church. Now, let's dive into things. Dear Summit family, as some of you may have seen, our pastor and our church are the subject of a recent documentary series about our attempted church merger with Faith Baptist Church in Knightdale. Now, pay attention. Church merger. That is, you're not going to see that phrase again. You're going to see a lot of different phrases. Now, there's a pattern there. Whenever we see a pattern, we should pay attention to it. It does not mean that it has some sort of specific meaning, but it does mean we should pay attention to see, is there a reason? Does the pattern mean something? Sometimes patterns don't. But let's continue on. We received no advance notification about this documentary, nor were we consulted about the issues discussed within. We saw it for the first time when the episodes were released to the public. Now, I think it's good practice. Whenever I do something on a little bit more of an investigative sort of level, I like to reach out to the person. In fact, I've reached out to J.D. Greer before. Never heard anything back. I reached out in multiple avenues. Never heard anything back. I think it's good practice. It's not necessary. I've talked about that before, but I think it's good practice so that someone can't say, "Oh, well, you didn't talk to me first. I would have answered your questions." It's always good to reach out, and if they don't respond to you, well, then it's on them. So that part there's nothing wrong there, but then it says, nor were we consulted about the issues discussed within. Well, that's only technically true. True in the sense that they weren't consulted about the documentary presenting the issues, but they were involved in a court case with these issues. In fact, from what I understand about the settlement, they were the only party that had no restriction on talking about these issues. For the past several months, they could have brought this out into public, but other members of the suit could not have. A lot of technicalities on that because it's a settlement, but yeah, Summit had a lot more power to tell the story. Now let's continue on. The story being told misrepresents the events as well as our intentions in the process. Well, I really hope that they clarify the misrepresentations and the intent. The Summit sought to pursue this path with the utmost integrity at every step. Okay, this sort of acts as a thesis that that the documentary misrepresents events, misrepresents their intent, and that they pursued this with integrity at every step. They need to now clarify and defend this statement. So let's see if they do. As your directional elders, our responsibility is to provide leadership and accountability for our church And over the last few weeks, we have made ourselves available to answer your questions. Obviously, as an outsider, we can't say if that's true or not, or how available they were. We have not spoken publicly about this yet, however, as we believed that it would be wise to refrain from responding in any public way until all parts were released. And honestly, reasonable. Yet, if you're going to complain about not receiving advance notice or consultation, why do a public letter? Why not reach out privately? You can't really complain about someone not reaching out to you about a public matter, which, public court records, public everything. This was a public matter. And when I first became aware of it, I was told about this story over a year ago. And what did I first do? I went and looked it up before I talked to anyone, and I was able to find information on it. So there's already a lot out in the public. If they're going to complain about not being talked to, then they need to extend the same sort of thing. That's not a major point of hypocrisy, but it is worth pointing out. We need to make sure that we're always applying our standards as fully as we ask someone else to adhere to. In 2023, we launched a mobile campus at Knightdale High School because several of our members lived in the Knightdale area and had a desire to better reach people in that area. Shortly after our launch there, the leadership of Faith Baptist Church in Knightdale approached us and asked us if we'd be open to discussing the potential of them joining our Knightdale campus due to a decline in attendance and financial stability. At their request, over the next several months, our church leadership, including both staff and directional elders, worked with FBC's leadership, Faith Baptist Church's leadership, as we explored the viability of this proposal. Now, let's note a couple things here. The leadership of Faith Baptist Church in Knightdale approached us. Who specifically and when? And what was that approach? What was discussed? If they're going to discredit the documentary, then those details are extremely critical. They're important for establishing the clear timeline of events. If you're going to disagree with how things are presented, then you need to establish clarity. You're going to also see this pattern. FBC approached us. Potential of them joining our Knightdale campus. There's going to be a lot of language about one-sidedness. FBC is taking the actions. We're just receiving requests. We're just passively responding to things. We're not an active participant, except for when they suddenly want to be an active participant. There's this switch back and forth. But when it comes down to anything regarding the dissolution of Faith Baptist Church and giving the building to Summit, it's always presented as potential of them joining our Knightdale campus at their request. And just pay attention to that. I want you to pay attention to that one-sided language regarding it. It's going to start to build a bit of a narrative. Again, they say things like next several months. What months? We need to know some of these because it does. Again, if they're going to be trying to discredit the documentary, they really need to establish some clarity here. And so far they haven't. Now, continuing on, worked with FBC's leadership as we explored the viability of this proposal, which functionally meant the members of FBC dissolving their church, joining our Knightdale campus, and giving the church's property to the Summit Church as the permanent location of our Knightdale campus. Again, more one-sided language. FBC, Faith Baptist, is the one doing everything. But they're very honest here. They actually agree with the documentary that it was not a merger or a simple merger of the two bodies, but that what was actually being presented was dissolving Faith Baptist, since they couldn't merge, they couldn't have a denominational association, dissolving Faith Baptist, then voluntarily Faith Baptist members going over to Summit's Knightdale campus, and then the property being given to Summit, and then obviously then it goes and meets back there. It's a different process. In January of 2024, the leadership of Faith Baptist expressed a clear desire. Again, more one-sided language, pay attention. Notice how Faith Baptist leadership is specifically called out, not the church as a whole. You're going to see, again, another pattern of that. There's going to be a lot of patterns of pointing fingers towards specific groups of people. So leadership of Faith Baptist expressed a clear desire to move forward with the process, and on February 19th, 2024, which is our first clear date, our directional elders elected to pursue it as well. As we mentioned, this would mean FBC dissolving their church by congregational vote and its members joining the Summit Church, something both sides were very aware of. Again, sort of one-sided. Here's what they're doing. They're coming to us. They're joining us. They're giving it to us. Very much disagreeing with the idea of mutual merger and presenting a gifting. They're doing all of this. They're joining us. Again, this is important because that's contradictory to what was being presented by Faith's leadership, which was merger. If you doubt me, again, look at that language and pay attention as we continue on. FBC leadership called for a congregational vote, and on May 3rd, 2024, another clear date, FBC voted 97 to 55 in favor of dissolving their church and giving the property to Summit Church. Now, there are many problems with that representation of things, but again, just notice the one-sided language, the doing being done by Faith Baptist, and again, the honesty and clarity about dissolving and gifting. No merge here, dissolving and gifting. And they say that this was more than meeting the required 51% threshold required by the FBC Constitution. Now, they know this vote was invalid. That's kind of important and critical to the story, but we'll continue on. The FBC bylaws provided clear guidelines on who should be considered an active member, and FBC leaders worked with their church's legal counsel to ensure their guidelines were met prior to the member vote. However, some individuals in the church filed legal action in state court to try and stop FBC from proceeding with the vote. Now, it's going to be important that this lawsuit is really not brought up in any detail. Why? Because it rules. Well, it doesn't rule. Okay. There's an injunction delivered, and the judge does point out that there were discrepancies with the vote regarding member eligibility. Summit knows this. They either knew it before, or they knew it at least by the time of the lawsuit. But we know that they know this. So this is a lie. Or at least such a distortion of the situation to simply just say, oh, well, they voted and it was the majority. They know that that misrepresents the truth. You also notice them say things like clear guidelines, worked with legal counsel, guidelines were met. They're building a narrative that, again, a judge disagreed with. So who do we believe? Summit, who has provided zero evidence, or a court that says, no? Now, we didn't get to see that lawsuit go to its conclusion because of things we'll see that happen, namely the bankruptcy. It is important to note that this lawsuit was brought against Faith Baptist Church by some of its members and other interested parties. They bring up other interested parties a couple times, but they never clarify who that is. Is this one extra person? Is this 500 extra people? Who are these parties? Why do they matter? Why it matters to Summit is they're going to point fingers at the mysterious other interested parties. Not against the Summit Church. Again, one-sided language. It's not about Summit, but about FBC leadership. Because the Summit Church was not a party to that legal proceeding. This is, again, kind of narrative building. They know what a judge would later say in the bankruptcy case that, yeah, Summit has been very involved since the beginning. But they want to say it here because that was not said about them regarding this case. Or at least it wasn't said in this case. Whether that bankruptcy judge was talking about the beginning involving this or not, they know it's a technicality. It's technically true. FBC leadership was unanimous in their belief that they had acted in strict accordance with their bylaws and the state guidelines of North Carolina. Again, they're building a bit of a narrative here. Summit knows what the judge said. Summit knows that an injunction, which they're going to admit here in a second, but injunction was delivered and that the vote was called into question. The validity of it was called into question. So to simply just give a blanket, oh yeah, no, it's fine. Oh, they thought they were acting in good faith. They know that that's not, to one degree or another, that's not true. A state court judge issued a preliminary injunction, however, which temporarily halted the dissolution proceedings until the lawsuit was resolved. Again, dissolution proceedings, not merger. And that's not surprising. If an injunction is delivered, well, of course it's going to prevent whatever is at the central heart of the lawsuit. It's going to prevent that from being carried out until the lawsuit's resolved. Continuing on. During this time, FBC was quickly running out of money and requested assistance from Summit to meet their financial obligations. Now again there we see more one-sidedness. FBC came to Summit saying that they needed money. Summit was not the active part of this. Faith Baptist was. On May 2nd, 2024, again, another clear date, we approved a grant of $170,000 to help FBC pay accrued and anticipated operational costs, salaries, and severance. Now, I've seen the settlement. When FBC got their church back, they had to pay these things out. So I don't know where that $170,000 supposedly went or what it was actually for. Now, what am I implying there? Okay, I should be more clear. Here we see Summit take a direct action for once, presented as an active player. And when is it? Well, it's when they're playing the hero, giving $170,000. Wow, that's a lot of money. We'll see in a little bit that that's not quite the case. To say it's a lot of money for Summit. But the explanation for this money, it makes no sense. Even in Summit's narrative, much clearer documentation and details would be needed to justify their explanation. And we're going to see why that's kind of a problem, why their own explanation doesn't make sense. So let's continue reading. This included ensuring that Faith Baptist Preschool would remain open through the scheduled end of the school year in May 2024. Faith Baptist Church leaders, now they had to, again, part of the settlement, there were many unpaid expenses relating to the preschool. Faith Baptist Church leadership told us that if the Summit Church had not given them the grant, they would have no choice but to close all operations, including the preschool, immediately. Now, they're already closed at this point. The church is. So, kind of strange. But we see more hero building. Summit's now a doer in this story, but they're a doer by doing good. Around this same time, FBC leadership made the difficult decision to file for bankruptcy. And this is where what I was saying about paying attention to $170,000. And the Summit Church reiterated our willingness to purchase the property if given the opportunity, as well as to satisfy the financial claims that were part of FBC's bankruptcy proceeding. So originally they were just going to get the building. They were going to give some money to pay out multiple things, but then now they're going to be getting the building via bankruptcy. Well, when you see the timeline, you realize there's just pretty serious problems with that, considering the lawsuit that was ongoing at the time that was preventing Summit from getting the building. But now with this bankruptcy, they can get the building that way. And in my non-legal opinion, this bankruptcy violated the terms of the injunction, at least on a common sense level. Again, legal can be much more technical. But around this same time, FBC's leadership made the difficult decision to file for bankruptcy. One-sided language again. Suddenly, FBC is back to doing things, and it's in something negative, filing for bankruptcy. This ignores evidence of Summit advising bankruptcy, or at least being part of the advisory process, giving them support. There's no specific date, which is kind of important because if they give them the $170,000 on May 2nd, 2024, a specific date, and they turn around and file for bankruptcy days later, well, you got a little bit of a problem, because then that looks like that looks bad. That looks like they were paid to file for bankruptcy. And again, Faith Baptist would end up having to pay the preschool. So where did this money go? It seems to support the idea that this money went into the lawsuit. But then again, we see more hero building towards Summit. The Summit reiterated their willingness to purchase the property if given, but we also see them being a passive participant. When it comes to the bankruptcy, this is where the court would 100% disagree, and the judge would say, no, you are an active participant. As part of the bankruptcy proceeding, the group that filed the state lawsuit requested from the Summit Church document between our church and FBC leadership. I didn't notice it until just now, but it doesn't say requested. Well, we'll look at that more later. But there's careful phrasing here about this, and let's just keep reading. We voluntarily produced these documents with the agreement that these documents would not be disclosed on the internet. Now, if you don't understand why that comment is strange, then you need to understand that things that happen in court are public. There has to be very particular and specific reasons why something would be sealed, not revealed publicly. So they're asking for an abnormal thing. Because we had concerns about statements being lifted out of context and misrepresented in public. But why? Why would they? This is one of the things that really bothers me about their whole narrative. When they have the protection of the court, where it becomes much, much more difficult for misrepresentations to occur. They have the opportunity to get their side out very factually and straightforward and truthfully. They have an opportunity, again, with the protection of the person asking questions, the lawyer, he can't throw bad questions at them. They can be objected to. Now, deposition is slightly different than a courtroom, but still, it's a bit of a missed opportunity. If you could provide, if you had the whole information, someone misrepresents it, then you could provide that and just be like, boom, here's the misrepresentation. And they have an opportunity right now. Point out the misrepresentation. Point to it directly. Give us the whole thing. But no, Summit can't do that because they've never released all of the information. They went through great lengths to avoid any information getting out publicly. That makes the odds of misrepresentation go up, not down. Continuing on, we have seen charges and character assaults made against our leadership on the internet related to this case that had nothing to do with the facts in question regarding the property. Like what? This, again, it's an emotional and unsupported claim. It's narrative building to show Summit as an innocent victim, a passive participant just being kind of bullied. But that doesn't explain what they just said about dodging the protection of the court in order to tell their side of the story. What is wrong there? That doesn't make sense. At first, they agreed. They agreed to not share these things. But later in the bankruptcy proceeding, that group, which had expanded to include non-FBC members, again, there's the boogeyman of non-FBC members. Now, I'm curious what that means. Not on the active member role? Or are they accusing third-party groups of getting involved? I didn't see this nefarious group of people involved when looking at the records. They want to create this narrative of almost like a conspiracy going on. And you're going to see them more directly state that here as we go along. But that group sought additional internal documents from Summit leaders and to dispose some of their leaders. That's not strange at all. They're a part of this. They're a party to it, and that's exactly what the judge said. In fact, the judge used strong language regarding their involvement, to the point of threatening censure if they didn't participate. Sanction, not censure. As we processed these requests, we grew concerned that these actions were no longer solely about disrupting the legitimacy of the vote, but potentially part of a larger smear campaign involving our church and our pastor. Justify that. Who? How? In what way? What was the goal of this smear campaign? And again, why would the protections of the court not be the best place to put the information out? An innocent person doesn't go, oh, I didn't want to reveal this in court because it could be misrepresented. Now, maybe you have a very low view of our justice system, and personally, I kind of do, but I'd still be willing to I'm someone who'd state my case regardless, but I definitely look at court and go, I can state my case with more protections generally here. So it comes off very strange. Now, here's something that I find very fascinating, and they will even point this out as a contradiction later, but we grew concerned that these actions were no longer solely about disputing the legitimacy of the vote. So what they're saying here is the bankruptcy case, which was not about the vote, that was the previous court case. They're saying the bankruptcy case was not about the vote. Well, of course it wasn't. Also, no one said that the only issue was the legitimacy of the vote. I mean, have they not seen the documentary? They've said that they saw the documentary. That was not the sole issue. It was the whole process being done inappropriately. Continuing on. During this process, it also became clear to our directional elders, staff leadership, and FBC leaders that legal proceedings could continue for years. So again, we see non-one-sided language. Why the change here? Because they're justifying how they forced a settlement, well, supposedly being a non-involved party. Now, again, the judge said, no, you're involved, and they were, again, you can look at the court documents. They're on them. They're part of this directly. They're not just a passive third party twiddling their thumbs on the side, being requested to produce documents. Why do they say this here? Because now they need to say that they're involved, so to a significant degree, so they can justify why they were able to get the settlement through at the very last minute before having to have their leaders deposed. But if they're this passive third party, how did they get Faith Baptist, who declared bankruptcy, how did they get the actual, the primary party of the bankruptcy to settle? They're not in the driver's seat, yet here they're saying they could just decide to end it. Now you could say, oh, well, it's because they were supporting Faith Baptist. Well, then again, you got a problem, because they're saying that they weren't this overseer. They weren't directing and guiding things. They were just passive. If they needed some sort of help, well, they give them some help. But it wasn't even for the lawsuit. It was to keep the lights on, essentially. So their narrative does not make sense. That's what bothers me about this letter. Even though we had nothing to hide, and it was clear that dissolving and uniting with the Summit Church, again, dissolve, unite, one-sided language, was the desire of the majority of FBC members as expressed by the congregational vote. They know that that's invalid. They know that there are issues, to the point that at the minimum it needed to be investigated. But this makes them appear innocent. If the vote's known to have issues, then it would be impossible for Summit to escape scrutiny on some of these points. We determined that continuing the extensive legal battles was not a wise use of our time or money. So, again, why are they being able to make these decisions? They're only a part of this lawsuit. If this is someone else's lawsuit, they're now a part of it. They can't just say, no, we're going to walk away. That's not how this works. This is, Faith Baptist leadership would have to be the one to back down. They need to get Faith Baptist, to go to the table for a settlement. That's a pretty massive admission. But there's more to that, and we'll continue on because we'll see it better. The point for us had never been about acquiring property. Keep that in mind. But reaching people in Knightdale. And by this point, the property had become a distraction to that mission. We were also mindful of the Apostle Paul's admonition that sometimes it is better to suffer wrong than put on a spectacle for the world. Again, displaying themselves not only as heroes, but also as victims. Not only are they innocent of wrongdoing, but they have been wronged themselves. We had not entered Knightdale looking for property. This is a lie. Their own budget document clearly states that they are looking for property when they enter a new region, new location. And in fact, in both 2023, 2024, and 2024, 2025, because their budget years are not New Year's, fiscal years are different, they set aside $11.7 million. Let's look at it right here. $11.7 million, or roughly 23% of their budget, more than they spend on missions, for growth and expansion. And if you're unclear that that is indeed for acquiring property and that is their goal, let us read from their own budget proposal. Our growth and expansion reserve is used to pay any existing debt and save money for future building projects. While launching campuses in mobile locations is a cost-effective way to begin reaching people in order to sustain long-term ministry, the transition to permanent buildings is our goal. Contrast that with, we never entered Knightdale looking for property. Here they say, the transition to permanent buildings is our goal. Our growth and expansion reserve strategically enables us to build cash on hand, so they carry it over year after year. So there's an entire there's more than just the 11.7 million set aside in the budget. What is that? We don't know. Don't speculate on that. It's just saying it's a revolving account, carries over year after year. We collaborate with financial consultants who work with some of the largest churches in the nation to help us continue to update our long-term financial strategy. Our financial position is one of the strongest among churches of our size. And then at the bottom of this section, they say, for many years, we've been asking God to provide a permanent location for our Chapel Hill campus. And because of your generosity and the savings we've built up through the Growth and Expansion Reserve, we have the opportunity to take initial step in fulfilling our goal of providing a permanent facility for the Chapel Hill campus. Again, when it comes to locations, they are actively seeking out permanent buildings. So that is something in there is so poorly communicated, at the minimum, so poorly communicated to be a lie, as to be a lie. Now, I don't think that was a mistake. The same people that put this letter together are the people that are putting budget proposals together. Not the exact same person, but they're involved in both of these processes in a way that cannot just be overlooked. Continuing on. When Faith Baptist Church approached us, again, one-sided language, they approached Summit with the idea of joining with us, again, not merger. We had been eager to consider it, but now that the property was an obstacle to the mission of reaching people, we believed that the will of the Holy Spirit to pursue a permanent campus, it was the will of the Holy Spirit to pursue a permanent campus elsewhere. I thought they weren't in Knightdale looking for a permanent location, and so walked away. The other problem here, and this is where it starts to get just uncomfortable for me, they're using the Holy Spirit to justify this move when they previously used the Holy Spirit to justify the attempted acquisition of the building. The Holy Spirit seems pretty fickle in how they describe him. Now, I've been very silly. I've thought that my opinions were God's opinions, only to be smacked down pretty hard on that. But using God to justify my actions is something I never want to be doing. And if I ever find myself having claimed that I knew God's will on something, and it turns out it wasn't, I will be very clear about that. And you know where the blame goes? It goes on me. Because guess what? That's a bit of blasphemy. That is not where I want to live my life. They have a very casual way that they present the Holy Spirit. I do not think we should be that casual. In December of 2024, all parties of the bankruptcy lawsuit, look at that, indeed, it is a bankruptcy lawsuit now, which now included the Summit Church, which now they're being very direct. Yes, we are involved. Negotiated a settlement that permitted the group who filed the state lawsuit to keep the property and the building. Again, why was Summit such an impactful force regarding the timing? Why the day before JD is going to be deposed is this settlement then pushed forward? Why do they have that much control? That is, again, it destroys their narrative, the narrative that they're building. They built the wrong narrative. This is one of the problems with lying. The best lie is 99.9% truth. The most obvious lie is from the person that gets greedy and goes too far. Generally, it's this sort of situation. I'm perfect. I did nothing wrong. I'm a passive person. And you start to build up contradictions. It's the think about your Miranda rights. You have the right to remain silent. That is a powerful tool. And I've found over time that one of the best things you can do when there's a dispute, hold your tongue. Okay, look at this physique I got. Yeah, I am the only person in my high school class or of the classes above and below to be sent to the principal's office for fighting. Big long story, guy threw a 40-pound backpack at me, thought it was funny. I didn't think it was funny. I didn't think he was making a joke. I thought there was some serious danger. Granted, I technically am the one that threw the first punch and really did initiate it. But the other guy almost got expelled. You know what I did? I held my tongue. I let the principal ask questions. I asked only the question that was asked. And the other kid just spewing out information. He became unreliable. And because of that, he drew the ire of the principal. Now, the principal is super awesome man. Super awesome man. No one ended up getting in trouble because he was really able to understand the situation, defuse everything, and make everything good. Awesome, awesome man. But they don't give any details here, but they keep going, they keep going, they keep going, they keep going. Now, I realized something as I'm kind of looking at things. I think I cut off part of the top of the letter as I was going through and reading because of the way I'm reading it on my screens. So I'm sorry if where the letter wasn't fully matching up there for a bit. So, continuing on, many of the FBC members have become part of our Summit family, and they worship and serve at our Knightdale campus. We are grateful that they are part of our family and movement. The essence of a church, of course, is the people, not property, and we now recognize it was in the Holy Spirit's plan to unite these believers in our church, even though the property did not come with them. What God put in our hearts, into the heart of Faith Baptist leadership and its congregation majority, did indeed happen. This is a gross rationalization. It's, again, the Holy Spirit simply just confirms every action that Summit takes. Even when those confirmations from the Holy Spirit conflict. So, will the real Holy Spirit please stand up? Who are you? And there's, again, there's lots of rationalization, but where is the evidence? Where are the facts? They made it clear that acquiring permanent buildings is a serious part of their financial plan. And then they lost a building, but then it's, oh, no. It was simply just we were supposed to get some of these people. Well, that's still predatory. Are you out here trying to get other churches' members? You know, this is not good. This is not presenting a good thing when you actually think about it. We believe it is important to be open with you as a church. Despite the claims being promoted in the video series, our church never sought to take anything from Faith Baptist Church. Except you tried multiple ways and have admitted that you were much more involved in the legal process than you've also tried to present yourself. You tried to just get the property for free. Again, there was going to be money exchanged, but in essence, not purchasing the property quite the same, because the whole, dissolve and then give the property, but then there was going to be, it was all complicated. But then you move on to bankruptcy, and then you're going to be the one who gets the property via that bankruptcy. You tried hard. That's a lot of effort. Even you have admitted it. You admitted just how extensive the court cases were. You admitted that this was not a simple process. You pushed it until it went one step too far for you. We simply responded to a request from FPC leadership to prayerfully consider uniting with them. Again, casting it all on the other side. But as we just talked about, we've seen that they've had to work. They had to put in effort. A lot of effort, a lot of money. It wasn't just the $170,000. This had to be hundreds of thousands of dollars. Legal expenses, that money that was given, other money given, money given to Jason Little, hiring on pastor from Faith Baptist. There was a lot going on. Prior to their reaching out, again, one-sided, Pastor JD had never even heard of Faith. Okay, one phrase you should never use, never even heard of. Well, I won't go too far into that, but it doesn't ever sound reliable. It sounds like the little kid going, I never even heard of that. I'm not saying that it's necessarily a lie that he never heard of Faith Baptist. I find it a little unreasonable considering that he hired Jason Little as a contractor, paying him $6,000 a month to research churches, not just in that local area, but just in general. This is a very data-driven church. So it's a little bit strange that they wouldn't know about a sizable church in their area. Because keep in mind, on the scale, Faith Baptist is small compared to Summit. But Faith Baptist was a large church by every metric. Continue on, so had never even heard of Faith Baptist and had no relationship with Pastor Jason Little. From everything I understand, Jason took a preaching class from JD. Not that they had an active and ongoing relationship, but it seems that they did at some point meet. That needs to be clear, and I'm not going to criticize him heavily for that, but just point out that they're weighting things towards their side. When together we believed that moving forward would help us fulfill Christ's mission, we moved forward at the invitation. First it's together, then it's at their invitation. It always comes back to one-sided language, specifically when it gets to the merger, the dissolution, and the handing over the building. They don't want to have an active participation in that part of it in any sort of way. We also see that it was helping fulfill Christ's mission. Again, appeal to God to justify action. This isn't quite the same. They're not saying that the Holy Spirit was directing it, but they're still appealing to God. In accordance with the expressed will of the congregation, as outlined in their bylaws, but Summit knows that this was illegitimate per the court. Why keep pushing that? What I find strange in this is that they didn't admit a little bit more and go, oh, wow, we weren't aware of how contentious this vote was. If you're going to go down the route of trying to just sweep things under the rug, why not that? What I'm saying there is this is bad manipulation. And I say that specifically because I was a manipulative jerk as a kid and a young adult. And God had to beat me over the head a lot with that. Not a fun process, but you learn a lot. This is bad manipulation. Again, it's a bad lie because it's trying to go way too far. We did not and do not believe it would have been right to walk away from these brothers and sisters in their struggle after we had agreed to request their help. Well, we were only there because we were trying to help them. Hero building, justifying their heavy involvement that they just denied they had. So what are they? Are they heavily involved or are they not involved at all? Where are they? Are they the hero or the poor victim? However, there came a point at which we, together with the leadership of Faith Baptist Church, decided, and again, this is the whole, how are they directing Faith Baptist leadership? How are they directing the timing of this? Decided that the road to maintaining possession of the property would cost more than we were willing to spend. So it would cost more than $11.7 million. I mean, for goodness sake, if they got the whole property after only spending $10 million, that would still have been a steal. Taxed assessed at 12, retail value, actual market value, probably double that. To get a large facility in a premium location that's only going to be getting more and more expensive. And again, they have the budget. That line doesn't seem to make sense, because it's only going to be much more expensive for them to try and get a location. So the decision was made to pursue a settlement, effectively ending all litigation. We want to be clear that the Summit Directional Elder Board, which contains a mixture of staff and lay elders, was heavily involved throughout the process, making all major decisions along the way. We're talking about on Summit's side of things. But this is probably not a good thing to say. It removes all plausible deniability on Summit's side about so many things, and in fact calls into question many of their previous statements. They're saying, hey, we were heavily involved, we were making all the major decisions, we had the information. And when necessary, according to our bylaws, even calling for a congregational vote of Summit church members. The narrative being told that our pastor or pastoral team used manipulation, dishonesty, bullying tactics, or engaging in a conspiracy is simply untrue. Then why have they used dishonesty, manipulation, bullying tactics in this very document? And we are deeply grieved by it. Our pastor and leadership team have nothing to hide. But they're not giving us any information. They're hiding everything right now. They're hiding everything. It's someone saying, oh man, I have this phenomenal poker hand. Oh my goodness, I have such a good poker hand. Oh, well, what cards do you have? I'm not going to tell you. Well, you just said that you're going to be honest and transparent, and you're going to, you have nothing to hide. Why aren't you revealing your hand? The round's over. Put your cards on the table. No, they're mine. You can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't have your transparency and not be transparent. As the elders of the Summit Church, we looked over their shoulder at every step. Our mission at the Summit Church is to follow the leadership of the Holy Spirit as we seek to make disciples in RDU and around the world. For us, and Faith Baptist leadership, this has always been about Christ's mission of impacting the community of Knightdale by shutting down a church. Our mission, okay, I shouldn't have said that. In their defense, what they're claiming would have created a larger church through, not through actual growth, but I shouldn't just say shut down a church. But they would be, and in the end, there still would be one less church in the region. Our mission has never been about acquiring property. Do I need to take you to their own documentation again, where they say clearly that their mission is about acquiring property and that they are actively pursuing that as a goal, but about reaching people in Knightdale. When acquiring the Faith Baptist property became a distraction to that mission, we walked away from it. Again, why were they the ones that were able to walk away from it? Why did they have any sort of impact in that? By God's grace, we continue to see the community impacted by the gospel and look forward to many more lives being changed by our presence in that community. Okay. This is just a bad response to this sort of situation. This is just sort of a bad response. If you are truly innocent, then you need to do either one of two things. You either need to say less or give more details. They went a middle route of trying to say more, but it just makes it thin and it makes the lies more apparent. All you have to do is just basically compare it to the information available, and you see that it just doesn't line up. It doesn't make sense. Even its own logic within the letter, does not make sense. If you have a different perspective, I would love to hear from you, but please, if you're going to disagree, Don't do it like Summit. Please give me some information, some evidence, something I can sink my teeth into. We can both look at and evaluate. There's details here. Because that's not in Summit's letter. And like I said, I'm working right now to give you guys a much clearer timeline and more information so you can really compare things. But I thought this was way too important not to respond to. Thank you for being here. I really hope this has helped to some degree. God bless you. And remember, God really has been very good to us, even during dark times, even during negative times. We follow him not because we expect everything to be good, but he has been so good to us, despite all of the problems that we see in our own lives. That's one of the reasons that the story is so important to me, is because it's such a story of hope. The hope that comes through faith. So, go bring glory to the name of the Lord.